Hey, how's it going everyone? This is Brandon Bias from Checkmark.com here with your fantastic and amazing and very exciting Tutorial Tuesday. And it is freaking hot in my room. What's with that? I don't know what it is about my room, but I don't get good air conditioning in here for one reason or another, and it's pretty miserable. So I'm gonna try and get through this without dying on you. And if you're like me and you don't like it when your room gets ridiculously hot, you should like this video. Or if you're just plain awesome like that, just like the video anyway. I mean, either way, like this video, make us feel good and happy, and kind of show everyone else that these tutorials are amazing. So with that said, let's get right into this tutorial. What I'm going over today has been requested by quite a few people, and the ironic thing is that I've actually done a tutorial on this already. It's how to remove a background from something, but it wasn't called that. It was called masking, and I guess people just don't get the hint, so here I am kind of doing a remake sort of thing. But since it's kind of lame to just do a repeat of something I've already done, I decided to take this to the next level. So not only are we going to be taking a picture like this and removing the background like that, just keeping Trixton right there, we're actually going to grab another picture like this snowy set of trees, and we are going to add Trixton into it like so, and even add a shadow, give him some color correction, and just make it look like he's actually there. So yeah, that's kind of all there is that we're going to be doing today. So I'll just delete that because we're going to be using this later. And we'll go back here and turn that back on, and voila, we are ready to start. Okay, so right now I would very much recommend that you open up whatever picture it is that you'd like to use to cut out your background and all that. And I would recommend looking up our masking tutorial real fast just to get an idea of how masking works and all that before you try and do this, because it is a little bit more in depth. And you know what, whatever, we'll just go right into this and see how it goes. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is decide who it is that we're going to cut out. I've already done that. I'm going to cut out Trixton right here. And so the simplest way to go about doing this, short of tracing out Trixton entirely, we're going to make this a lot simpler, and we are going to go over here to our quick selection tool. And this tool is best in Photoshop CS5. From what I know, it doesn't work quite as well in CS4, and I don't even know if it exists in CS3 and CS2. So follow along if you can. If not, you can learn something new from this anyway. Alright, so what we're going to do with this, now that we've got our little tool right here, we're going to zoom in on a little starting point. I figured I would just go with the shoes just because they're pretty simple. And I'm going to size up my tool just because it looks a little dinky at the moment, so I'm going to use the right bracket key to do that. Or you can just use the little dealio up here, little size and hardness and all that. But you don't really have to mess with that. And by default, you should be set to this little icon right here, which is just add to selection, so just make sure with that as well as I am. So to do this is actually pretty simple. All you're going to do is just put your little tool on the section that you want to mask out. And you're going to click and drag and just kind of follow along your the body, and it should do its best to automatically select your person for you. And so keep in mind, this isn't a perfect tool. When it comes to pictures, they're always imperfect, and the tool's not perfect either. So it's always going to do a little mess up here and there. Like, see right there, it didn't get the little shoelaces and all that. But do what you can, just kind of go through and click and drag in the areas that you want to select, and just get the general idea of what it is you want to mask out. And then when it comes to smaller areas like this, just go ahead and size down your little tool by hitting the left bracket key. And there we go, it kind of fits the thumb a little bit, so we'll just click and drag, and that'll select it for us, and we'll just go along. And so it should automatically just adjust a little bit depending on the pixels and all that. So this is basically all you're going to do, is just you're going to go through, try to add selections as you can. It doesn't have to be, spot on perfect, or I guess you can try, it's kind of up to you, but you don't really have to. And then something that you're going to want to know when it comes to the hair, you don't have to try and get this spot on perfect, because you're going to be able to get to that in a little bit right after this. Because if you're going to try and select all of this, it's going to end up going haywire at some point, and it's going to just select all this stuff that you don't actually want to get. So do what you can, just get as much hair as you can, and just call it good. And then I noticed over here that it likes to miss this area, so I'm just going to go through. Okay, so once you've got most of your person selected with your quick selection tool, you might want to take a moment and look through like all the little areas and such to see if there's something that you want to fine tune. And the best way, in my opinion, to fine tune this is to go over here and grab your polygonal lasso tool. And then what you're going to want to do is just find whatever it is that your quick selection tool didn't get. And if you want to add to it, like say I want to add this little shoelace right here, you'll want to hold the shift key and then just kind of click and just kind of start clicking through and selecting the entire shoelace. And if you mess up with your lasso tool, I found out that you can actually use the backspace key to kind of undo that. So that's a very handy little deal right there, because at one point I didn't know that, and because of that I hated the polygonal lasso tool. Okay, so I got this entire shoelace selected, but there's this little area in here that I don't want, and so to get rid of that, I'm going to hold the Alt key, or the Option key if you're on a Mac, and now I'm just going to select through that area like so. Okay, so I've successfully removed that area from my selection. And so all you're going to do is just kind of go through your image and fine tune it with the polygonal lasso tool as you see fit. Okay, so I've gone through and fine-tuned this little selection as I felt necessary. I'm not going to get too in-depth with that just because I just don't want to waste too much time just kind of making a selection around something I'm not really planning to keep. And so that means we're ready to move on to the next step, which is to go to this little Refine Edge button up here. If you don't see that, just make sure you're on one of these selection tools like the Marquee tool, the Lasso tool, the Quick Selection tool. You know, just any of these selection tools, as long as you have one of those activated, you can go to this little Refine Edge thing right here. And before you click that, I highly recommend zooming in on wherever you have a lot of hair. Like here with Trexton, we've got all this hair right here, so I'll zoom in right there. And now we'll go ahead and click the Refine Edge button. And so now you're going to get this little Refine Edge menu. And there's a lot to this, and I'm going to cover that. But before we mess with any of these settings or anything like that, we want to make sure that Photoshop knows that all of this area right here is part of a very unique selection for an edge that we need to manipulate, or not really manipulate, but just kind of let Photoshop know that there's stuff here that it needs to decipher whether or not to keep it in our mask or not. So to do this, all we're actually going to do is just use the default tool that we have going on here and just kind of click and highlight any bit of hair that we have that's kind of like on the edge right here. So we'll just select all that, and we'll select this area right here, and then we'll kind of go just along the edge just for safekeeping, and we'll come all the way back down, and we'll select all this hair right here, and then when you let go, it should do a little thinking thing, and then it'll do its best to decipher what it is that it wants to keep and which to exclude. And obviously it gets a little bit of the background still in there, but that's okay, because now we're ready to fine-tune this sucker. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit to get a better look at what we have going on here. And so the first thing that we notice is that we still have that color in Trexton's hair. And so the best way to get rid of that is to go down here and activate the decontaminate colors. And so that's automatically just kind of fix that up just a little bit for us, but we're going to amp up the amount just a little bit like so. And so that'll fix that up a little bit for us. And then I noticed that along his arm and along other sections, it's a little ragged, so we'll go over to the smooth and we'll amp that up to maybe 20. And so that should smooth it out a little bit for us. And the next thing you notice is that we have a little bit of an edge on his elbow, and we still have a little bit of his hair and all that in there. And so to kind of help remove that a little bit, we're going to shift the edge down a little bit, and so that'll kind of move it in, and then we'll amp up the contrast, and maybe not so much on the shift edge. And then we're going to amp up a feather to maybe 1 pixel. And so all together we're getting something pretty nice, but just to add that final little touch to it, we're going to turn on the smart radius, and we're going to change that to 1 pixel. And so with all of those settings changed, we have a pretty good looking mask going on here. And so there are actually 2 things that I forgot to mention. One of which is that we are going to be outputting this to a new layer with a layer mask. And also, if you don't have this black background that I do, you're just going to go up here to the view menu and you can just choose the on black. And it's got all these other different settings that you can go for, like overlay. You can see how much of this it's selecting based on like showing the picture and all that behind it. You can do this on white. You know, there's just all these different things that you can use just based on your personal preference. So now that we've got all of this figured out, we'll go ahead and hit OK. And there we go. We've got a very nice and very clean cutout of Trexton. And something that you'll notice, like in small areas like the shoelaces down here, it actually cuts out the shoelaces. And thankfully, we put this on a layer mask so we can actually bring those back. And the easiest way that I find to do that is to go to the band jump layer, or wherever it is that you have as your original, and we'll turn that back on, and we'll set the opacity to maybe 80% or something like that. And then we'll go to the layer mask of the cutout version of Trexton. And so, actually, I'm going to go ahead and rename that now, Trexton. There we go. And then we'll just grab a brush, and we'll make sure that it's small enough. So I'll size that down with the left bracket key. And then we'll just make our foreground color white. And I'll zoom in, and we're just going to go ahead and paint in white on whatever areas that we want to bring back. So I'll bring in the shoelace. Whoops, my bad. Edit, undo that. I need to make sure I'm on my actual mask. I was actually drawing whites in on the layer itself. So there we go, much better. We'll bring all of this back right here. And then we'll bring back the shoelace up here, and a little bit more right there. And some more right there. And so that's just the general concept behind that. If you've got areas that you want to go ahead and bring back, go ahead and do that yourself. I'm just going to go ahead and call that good. And so now, finally, we are ready to grab our move tool and click and drag this to whatever picture it is that we have open, and just bring that on down. And so if you get this little paste profile mismatch thing, just go ahead and hit OK, kind of ignore that, doesn't really make a big difference. And so now we're ready to start manipulating Trexton so that it actually looks like he's in this little picture that we've got here. And so when you're doing that, there are a couple of things that you want to keep in mind when you're manipulating and moving and changing this layer up. And so the things that you need to take into consideration when you're doing something like this is the size and the position, the lighting, and the coloring. And so we're going to focus on that first point right now, which is the size and the position and all that. And so obviously this picture of Trexton is a little bit too big for this particular image. So we're going to bring up the transform tool with Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac computer. And I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to click in one of these corners while holding Alt and Shift, or Option and Shift when you're on a Mac. And you're going to want to size this down to something that seems like it fits the size of the area of where you want to put it. And since I've already experimented with this, I know somewhere around 31% or so is actually pretty good for me. And I want this to look like he's jumping into the air, so maybe I'll position him up and maybe somewhere just right there, something along those lines. And so the next thing that we need to make sure we take into consideration is the lighting. And if you pay close enough attention, and if I zoom in, you'll see that the shadows of the snow are on the right here. And so that means that the lighting is coming from the left and going to the right. But for Trexton, the picture was taken with the sun on the right going, and so the shadows are being cast left. So the shadows are a little bit backwards. So just to fix that, we'll right click and flip him horizontally. And then we'll just kind of tilt him a little bit this way just to make him look a little bit more straight up and down. And so now that we've successfully addressed the whole lighting issue, now that we've got the lighting going the right direction and everything's transformed exactly the way we want it to, we can go up here and hit the little check mark. And I'm going to move him a little bit more over here. And so one thing that you're probably going to notice when you size down an image like that, I'm going to solo this out by alt-clicking the little eye icon right here, or that's an option click for a Mac. Usually you're going to get a little bit of a line somewhere up here. It's a little bit hard for you to see, but on my screen I can see it. And so to get rid of that, we'll just go to our brush tool and we'll make sure that we're on the mask for it. And I'm just going to size this sucker up and swap to black, and I'm going to get rid of that line right there. There we go. And then there's going to be a little bit of a line on the bottom as well, so we'll just get rid of that. And I hope I got that, so we'll just turn on all of this again. And now we are set to move on. Okay, so we're going to need a couple duplicates of this in order to get the effect that we want to create. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate this Trexton layer twice by hitting Ctrl J and Ctrl J again. And one of these copies we are going to rename to Motion Blur. And we're going to put that under Trexton. And then we are going to name the second copy, what was it? Alright, we're going to make this our shadow. And so we're going to want to flatten these two layers. And the easiest way to do that is to select one of them and Control click the Create a New Layer icon. And then Control click the Motion Blur layer like that, so that way they're both selected, and then merge them together with Control E or Command E, and now that's just one flattened image. And then we'll just do the same thing for the shadow layer. Make a new layer underneath it, select them both, and merge them together. And so next we're just going to go back to our Motion Blur layer right here, and we're going to go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and we're going to set the angle to 90 degrees, and we are going to set the distance to 12. And if you just kind of look around, that just gives it a nice little motion blur up and down. And if you hit OK and you zoom in, you'll see that there's just a little bit of blur around the edges. And that just gives it the feel that he's actually moving rather than just kind of floating in the air. And then next up, we're going to go over here to the shadow layer. And we are just going to give that a color overlay. And so we want this to be the same color or roughly the same color as the other shadows that are here. So we're going to just click this little color picker over here, and we are going to pick the shadow color over here. And so our goal is actually to over exaggerate this just a little bit so we have a little bit more control when it comes to changing our opacity and all that to match the shadow and all that. So we are going to go down and a little to the right. And that way it's just a very dark grayish blue color, and we'll hit OK, and we'll hit OK again. And so now we're going to manipulate this to look like it's more like it's on the ground. And so we'll bring up the transform tool with Control T, and we're going to right click and flip this vertically, and we're going to move this down here and rotate it a little bit. And so here is the actual tricky part. We want this to look more 3D rather than just kind of just as it is. And so the easiest way to actually go ahead and do that is to hold the Control key or the Command key if you're on a Mac computer. And we're going to take one of these points and drag it downward like so. And we're going to move this layer back up a little bit. And so just kind of use the Control key. Piece of crap. We're going to use this Control key to just kind of manipulate this like so. And so now if you kind of look at this box that I manipulated, I kind of made it look like it's a 3D kind of, just kind of a 3D look right there. It looks more like it's on the ground. But I want to actually change this just a little bit more, move this a little more that way, and kind of move that over here. And that's actually looking pretty good right there. Just some things you want to keep in consideration is placement. Like, I kind of like to keep the shadow a little, just barely off center of like where the feet are supposed to be. So in my opinion, that's actually looking really good right there. And we'll hit the check mark. And the next thing we want to take care of to add to the realism of this shadow is to add a layer mask to it. And grab our brush tool with the letter B, and we'll zoom out and size up our brush with the right bracket key. And we are just going to use our brush to paint in a little black like so. And so that way it looks like it's kind of fading off a little bit. and then we'll just change the opacity down to maybe somewhere in the 20-30%-ish area. And obviously shadows are not quite so crisp, so we'll go ahead and add a blur, Gaussian blur. And I accidentally still had the thumbnail for the mask selected, so I'll go back to the actual thumbnail, and now we'll add the Gaussian blur. And so I'm just going to go ahead and stick with the 6 or 7 pixel blur. You can do whatever the heck you want for that. And if you notice, if we alt-click this, not alt-click, shift-click to turn that the mask on and off, you'll notice that the mask that we added earlier kind of helps to add to the realism by making this fade out a little bit as it gets a little further away from the body. And so, let's see, we've accomplished the position and the lighting a little bit. And actually, now that I think about it, there's a little bit more that we need to change about the lighting. If you've noticed, the lighting on Trexton is a little harsh in comparison with everything around him. So what we're going to do is go to Trexton's layer, and we are going to grab the burn tool, and we're going to make sure that we're set to the highlights with an exposure of around 20 or 30% or so around there. And so we're just going to zoom in, and we're going to use this burn tool on anything that's really bright. So maybe this little section on the shirt, and then Trexton's face and his ear, and then on his hand and arm, and on his other hand and arm. And so just to show you the little before and after, I'll do a little Control-Alt-Z and do that a couple of times. And so if you do a little before and after, you'll see that that actually really does dampen those highlights on those areas that we burned. And so now it actually looks a little bit more convincing that it's there because the lighting's not quite so intense. And so finally, the last thing that we need to take care of is the coloring. And that's actually pretty simple. We'll just make sure that we have the Trexton layer selected, and we'll go to our adjustments. If you don't have those, just go to Window Adjustments like so. And then we're going to add a color balance. And this is going to be different for whatever picture it is. I mean, for all I know, your picture is already perfect in terms of color and all that, so you don't even have to do this. But Eli is a little bit, or not Eli, Trexton is a little bit too red for this blue picture. So in the midtones, we're going to change this first slider more to the Cheyenne. And I didn't remember to clip that. So before you actually do that, go to this little icon and give that a click, and that will make sure that it's just affecting the layer below it, which in this case is the Trexton layer. So anyway, back to what we were doing. I amped up the Cheyennes, and we're also going to amp up the blues, just a little bit like so. And then maybe add just a barely hint of green in there. Okay, maybe we'll screw the green. Okay, much better. And so just to make sure that everything is getting that little bluish hue to it, we'll go to the highlights, and we'll barely change those to the Cheyenne and the blue. And so if you do a little before and after, you'll see that this looks a lot more blue. In fact, it might be a little bit too blue. We'll make it a little bit more Cheyenne. We'll just kind of mess with this a little bit. And whatever, you get the general concept. I'm not going to spend a lot of time messing with this because it's really pointless, because I'm going to delete this later. Alright, so that's all there is to this particular tutorial. I hope you learned something new from this. It's definitely something pretty cool to do if you do it right. You should definitely experiment with this and just see if you can get an effect that you like. And hopefully this was a useful tutorial for you. If you haven't seen last week's tutorial, you should go check that out. It's a really neat tutorial. I'm sure a lot of people would learn something from it. And also, if you like our tutorials and you want to be part of the whole tutorial discussion and all that, we do have requests on our YouTube channel, and also we have a Facebook page which you should go check out. And if you have any questions, post them in the comments below. I'll be sure to help out as best as I can. And so with all that said, I will go ahead and call it an end for this tutorial, and I'll see you next time.